Hi, I'm Angela Fair. Here on my channel, you learn watercolor techniques to help you paint more confidently, an artist mindset to help you become your own favorite artist. Today, we're going to have a little bit of fun with color. We're going to celebrate our love for the color red. We're going to explore some of the reasons why you might be struggling with using red in your paintings, ways to mix red to create more impact in your paintings, and the different types of red that you should have in your watercolor palette. Let's get started. Let's talk about the color red. This is Perylene Red, made by Daniel Smith. And when we're painting with red in watercolor, often it can be really difficult to create a red painting that actually works. We tend to struggle with working with reds. And the main reason we struggle with red is because we tend to think of red as a light value color. I'm going to just put some ultramarine blue down beside it. When we talk about value, value means the lightness or darkness of a color. If you were grading this on a scale of 1 to 10, with white being the lightest and 10 being the darkest, where would these two colors rank? Where would our ultramarine blue and our red rank? If you're thinking of red as a light value color, we might think of it as maybe a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And we would think of the blue as possibly a 7. But if you look at these in black and white, you'll see they're actually very, very close. The blue is only marginally darker than the red. So that indicates to us that when these colors are side by side, there's not a lot of contrast there. And if we're putting, and especially because we often work with red and green together, thinking of maybe flowers, tulips, for example. Paint ourselves a little tulip here, using pretty much the pure saturation of the red. And then let's see what kind of green I have to play with. This nice undersea green from Daniel Smith. And then we might decide we want a background that's green as well, and then we just start adding and building up color. And because we think of red as being a light value color, we make the values around it dark so that it stands out and pops. And what happens is we lose contrast because the values are too similar. So it really pays to think of red as a dark value color and surround it with lighter value colors. And it's going to continue to keep that nice strong presence when those lighter value colors are surrounding it and bleeding into it in this case. The other thing we do with red is we tend to think of it as a primary color, and so we count on it for mixing. So let's take our Perylene Red. I think it's pretty close to a true red, kind of a lipstick red. We're going to grab some cadmium yellow, and we're going to mix those right here on the paper. Just stir them together. And we should get a nice bright orange, right? Need a little more yellow, get it balanced out. Maybe a little more yellow yet. Mixing with watercolor really is just a back and forth of trying to get the color proportions right. So there's our orange. Now to me, that orange looks just a little bit cloudy. And in fact, if we let some of that color bleed, we see how murky it does look. We don't get a nice clear peach, and we don't get a nice brilliant orange. I wouldn't use this to paint a tangerine. If we're mixing our ultramarine blue, which we often think of as a true blue, and that's a story for another video, with our red. And again, I'm mixing on the paper. You can choose to mix in your palette, but mixing on the paper can create some fun effects and variations of color, as I've kind of done up here, and let the colors mix organically. So that's, how close is that to violet? Are we getting a nice rich purple? Maybe it's a little bit red. We'll go up with the blue a little bit more, the ultramarine, and just stir it around until we see if we can get close to that royal purple, that rich royal purple that we're looking for. It's looking like a near black on the screen. Let's bleed it out a little bit and see what it turns into. And again, it's not brilliant, it's murky. So as you're mixing with red, you might find yourself feeling disappointed that you're not getting those pure brilliant colors that you'd like. So rather than using the Perylene Red for your mixing, you're better off choosing a color that would be closer to what you might find in your printer. And so let's try the Quinacridone Magenta, which, as you can see, is a pretty nice, cool magenta. And if you hear some people talking about warm red and cool red, the magenta is definitely going to be your cooler red. It has that nice bluish cast, and it's going to mix more nicely with your ultramarine. Already you can see that's a nice, clear, pretty violet. Not nearly so murky. Doesn't have quite as much personality maybe. And your orange, and even here you're still getting the cadmium yellow isn't the ideal choice, but you're getting a nice peachy coral hue. And so you have purer, brighter colors, and if you really want a nice violet, you can take your magenta, a more turquoisey color. This is Cinereous Blue, and I've probably grabbed like way too much. Cinereous Blue is made by Sennelier, and I'm having no luck in grabbing a good quantity of it today, so we'll just take way too much, and then we'll add the magenta to it. And you can see that's giving us a pretty vibrant shade of violet. It's still not going to be super dark. These aren't dark value colors, and the magenta isn't going to be as dark in value. It's not quite as dark in value as that cherry red, lipstick tomato red, whatever you want to call it. They're just a little bit, one is warm and one is cool. So when you're working with magenta, which if you're starting out with a basic palette and wanting to know which red to choose, ideally you want to have both a cool red and a warm red, a cool blue and a warm blue, cool yellow and a warm yellow in your palette. But if you can't, choose the cooler red, because you can take your yellow and get closer to a tomato red with the right mixture of yellow. You're going to be able to warm up that magenta and get it closer to a red. Actually, that looks like a cherry red. That's your tomato red, and your magenta in the middle. There is so much fun to work with red. Remember also that if you're working with red, you do not need to go out and buy pink. If with watercolor, the white you would mix to create pink comes from your paper. So you can take a lovely magenta like this, and with the addition of water, just dilute it down, and more diluting, and more diluting, and get that beautiful blush pink. That's really fun to play with. Personally, I really don't use red, this warm red, very often. I find it so much easier and more versatile to go to the magenta. Magenta I can pair with beautiful yellow greens. Cobalt teal makes a beautiful partner for magenta, and my green gold is really fun to use with magenta. You can pair it with violets and have kind of a analogous color scheme, because it really pairs beautifully with a violet like this, and it looks really good with greens as well. A lot of these tomato reds tend to be a little opaque. If you're rinsing them out in your water container here, your water tends to get a little cloudy, and they just cover more strongly than the more transparent magentas. So that means they don't mix as nicely. They tend to get a little murky when you're mixing them. You can get some really beautiful neutrals with your red, and in fact you can make a near black. I'm just adding undersea green, but sap green works as well, Prussian green. Choosing a kind of a darker green to mix with your red gives you your black. And in this case, it's looking pretty brown today. And a lot of mixing fascinating neutrals comes from mixing two complementary colors like this. And the blacks you can mix, the near blacks that you can mix by mixing complementary colors such as red and green are generally much more interesting and rich than just using straight black from the tube. When you're working with red, there's some colors that are going to make it look kind of ugly. As you can see, this red-green mixture is bleeding up over here and creating this dark neutral. And those dark neutrals, as you can see, letting it bleed out, can be really interesting. They can create quiet neutral space that makes those bright colors stand out a bit more. And I have like a dancer standing here or something, or an angel with the bright red head. But those murky neutrals can also really suck a lot of the life out of your painting if you're looking for light and delicacy. So if you're going to be painting with these warm true reds, my advice to you is keep those values light for as long as possible. Start with a really pale wash of red, and pay attention if you're painting flowers and the sun is shining on them, pay attention to the way the reflections of the sunlight actually make areas of really light value. Not everywhere is going to be that strong darkest dark. Creating some areas where you can see the paper through that transparent layer of paint is going to help your reds not be quite so heavy and dominant in your painting. I do the same with my greens. I start with the yellow green, like green gold, and then if it pushes up into my flower a bit, you actually see the yellow more than you see the green there, and it still feels light as opposed to the heaviness of the mixture, the murky mixture that I have of green and red flowing up into my flower. So keep your colors light, keep your values light early on. I can build up rich layers of red as this dries and create my depth and my form. But starting with those light values gives you a little more room to work so that you don't fall into those traps of having a strong dominant dark value color early in the painting that you then have to compensate for in every other part of your painting. Working with red can be a lot of fun. It's a powerful color. It can create that pop of impact in your painting. And by treating it as a dark value color, by starting with those paler washes and knowing when to choose a magenta, a cooler toned red, to do your mixing, you'll have a lot more fun controlling red rather than letting it control you. I want you to take a look at this painting by one of my students. Cyan has been in my watercolor workshop interactive course, and she shared this exploration of color in the workshop community. And I wanted to share it with you because it really is a wonderful example of how choosing different temperatures of red changes your painting. These two paintings both have a lot of energy, a lot of rich, beautiful saturation of color, but they also have very different energy to them. They have a different mood, and the colors have mixed differently. So we have in the warmer red, we see more darker neutrals where the red has flowed and mixed with some of the other colors. It doesn't mix in as pure a way. And so some of the color some of the color mixtures are a little bit dull. That's not a bad thing. It actually, having a little bit of that dullness gives you a little bit of quiet space and some quieter neutrals that can help the brighter colors to sing a little bit more, but it is something to be aware of when you're using those warm colors. Thank you for sharing your paintings with us, Cyan, and letting me include them on this video. One thing I want you to think about as you look at the reds in your palette is that you don't need to have the same color that I use in my paintings. You can choose your red based on whether it's warm or cool, and know how to mix it more confidently as you start to get to know its properties. Working on really excellent 100% cotton watercolor paper will help you as well. It doesn't fight those rich saturations of colors, and the first layers don't want to lift as you continue to layer, so keep that in mind. I have so much more that I'd love to teach you if you're getting started in watercolor, that I've created a special online event that will be taking place February 27th, 28th, and March 1st. This is a free beginner bootcamp workshop in watercolor, and it's open to anyone, but you do need to sign up to receive your invitation to join. I've included a link so that you can sign up for the beginner bootcamp in the description below the video. Also check there for links to supplies that I've used here today, and leave a comment. Let me know what colors you're struggling with using and mixing in your palette. I'd love to feature them in a future lesson. And subscribe to my channel. I share weekly inspiration, tips and techniques, and motivation to help you grow in your watercolor journey. I'm Angela Fair. Thank you for watching.